The Consensus Wars by John Kitchen. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. This is a work of cybered fiction that was created in an iterative process using multimodal large language models. Any resemblance to any person, place, or institution, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 4. The Intervention. 2 weeks later, Elena found herself standing in the parking lot of Millfield High School's gymnasium, watching Coach Patterson address a crowd of parents at what the local newspaper had advertised as a community health and safety meeting. What the newspaper hadn't mentioned was that CIRG had helped organize the event. "The thing about keeping our kids safe," Patterson was saying from behind a folding table laden with coffee and homemade cookies, "is that we got to base our decisions on good information. Not politics, not fear, just solid information from people we trust." Elena held her breath. This was the moment their entire experiment hinged on. Would Patterson's credibility be enough to overcome vaccine hesitancy that had persisted despite months of official public health campaigns? Sarah squeezed Elena's arm. They were positioned near the back of the gymnasium, ostensibly just concerned community members attending a local meeting. Their real role was to observe and document the intervention they'd spent weeks designing. The key insight had come from their diner conversation with Patterson. Instead of bringing outside medical experts to lecture the community about vaccines, they'd worked with Patterson to invite Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the town's only pediatrician, someone who delivered half the babies in the room and treated their children's broken bones and ear infections. But the real innovation was how they prepared Dr. Martinez for the conversation. "Before we talk about vaccines specifically," Martinez said, taking the microphone from Patterson, "I want to talk about something we all understand: protecting our team." Elena watched the audience's body language. Instead of the defensive postures they'd observed when outside health officials had visited Millfield, people were leaning forward, paying attention. Martinez was using football metaphors that resonated with the community's values, connecting vaccine science to concepts they already endorsed. "Coach Patterson taught my son that you don't just train individually, you train as a team. Because on Friday nights, you're not just protecting yourself out there, you're protecting your teammates, your school, your community." The analogy wasn't accidental. Maya had conducted extensive interviews with community members, identifying the metaphorical frameworks that shaped how Millfield residents understood complex issues. Military service, team sports, and family protection consistently emerged as powerful, conceptual organizing principles. "Now, I know some folks have concerns about vaccines," Martinez continued, "and I want to address those concerns directly because they're legitimate concerns from people who love their kids just as much as I love mine." This was the crucial moment. Instead of dismissing vaccine hesitancy as ignorance or irrationality, Martinez was treating it as understandable parental protectiveness. Rather than creating an adversarial dynamic between pro-vaccine experts and anti-vaccine parents, she was positioning everyone as parents trying to make the best decisions for their children. Elena watched faces in the crowd, recognizing several people from their observational research. There was Janet Morrison, Danny's mother, who'd expressed skepticism about big pharma profits on the local Facebook group. There was Tom Hendricks, the mechanic who'd shared articles about vaccine ingredients he couldn't pronounce. There was Maria Santos, the teacher who worried about rushing new medical technologies. Each of them was paying attention to Martinez in ways they hadn't paid attention to visiting health officials. The difference wasn't the information being presented. Martinez was covering the same ground about vaccine efficacy and safety that outside experts had covered. The difference was that Martinez was speaking their language, literally and figuratively. "I've been taking care of kids in this town for 15 years, Martinez said. "I've seen kids hospitalized with pneumonia, meningitis, whooping cough, diseases that vaccines prevent. And I've also seen parents struggle with difficult decisions about their children's health. Both of those things are real, and both of them matter." Elena found herself taking notes not on the content of Martinez's presentation, but on the audience's response. Nodding heads where there had previously been crossed arms. Questions instead of accusations. People leaning forward instead of backing away. The breakthrough came when Tom Hendricks raised his hand. "Doc, I keep reading about all these chemicals and vaccines that I can't even pronounce. How do I know those are safe for my kid?" In previous community meetings, this question had triggered defensive responses from health officials who would lecture about the safety testing process or dismiss concerns about chemicals by pointing out that everything was made of chemicals. Martinez took a different approach. "Tom, that's exactly the kind of question a good father should ask," she said. "You work on engines. You know that just because something has a complicated name doesn't make it dangerous. But you also know you should understand what you're putting in your engine before you put it there." Elena watched Tom's posture shift from defensive to attentive. Martinez had acknowledged his expertise rather than dismissing his concerns. "So, let me walk through some of those ingredients, and I'll tell you what they actually do," Martinez continued. "Formaldehyde sounds scary, right? But your body produces more formaldehyde naturally than you'll find in any vaccine. It's there in tiny amounts as a preservative, like the preservatives you use to keep your tools from rusting." The explanation worked because it connected abstract chemical information to concrete mechanical knowledge that Tom already possessed. Instead of making him feel stupid for asking the question, Martinez made him feel smart for asking it. The meeting continued for another hour, with Martinez addressing concerns about autism, using local examples of children with autism whose parents were present, fertility effects, connecting to the experiences of women in the room who'd had healthy pregnancies after vaccination, and long-term safety, acknowledging uncertainty while contextualizing it within the broader uncertainties of parenthood. By the end of the evening, 12 families had scheduled vaccination appointments, not a complete transformation of the community, but a measurable change in behavior that could cascade through social networks as those families shared their experiences. As the crowd dispersed, Elena overheard Janet Morrison talking to her neighbor. "You know, when Dr. Martinez explains it like that, it makes sense. She's not trying to sell us anything. She's just trying to keep our kids healthy." Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement as they walked to their car. "Did you see that? The same information, but delivered by a trusted local source using metaphors that resonated with community values. No political rhetoric, no appeals to external authority, just neighbor talking to neighbor." Elena nodded, but her excitement was tempered by unease. "It worked," she agreed. "But doesn't that prove how manipulable people are? We basically ran a psychological operation on this community." "Or," Sarah countered, We ran a medical intervention. We identified a problem, misinformation spreading through social networks, and developed a targeted treatment that helped accurate information compete more effectively. The distinction felt important, but fragile. Elena thought about the pharmaceutical industry, which used sophisticated research to develop both life-saving medications and addictive opioids. The same techniques, the same scientific rigor, but serving very different purposes. What happens when someone else uses these techniques for misinformation? Elena asked. What happens when fossil fuel companies figure out how to deploy trusted local voices to spread climate denial? Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring out at Millfield's darkened streets. Then, we'd better figure out how to counter those efforts before they do. Elena felt the weight of what they'd unleashed. They'd proven that beliefs could be changed through careful social engineering, that trusted messengers could overcome even deeply held skepticism, that the right approach could make scientific information feel like common sense instead of political assault. But they'd also proven that truth and falsehood operated by the same rules in human social networks. The techniques that could spread accurate information about vaccines could just as easily spread inaccurate information about climate change or evolution or any other scientific consensus. As they drove back toward the highway, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Alex back at the warehouse. Initial data analysis confirms significant attitude shifts. Vaccination appointments up 340% over baseline. Ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 would involve scaling their approach to larger communities, training more local messengers, developing systematic methods for identifying and countering misinformation campaigns. If successful, it would represent a new model for science communication, one that worked with human psychology instead of against it. If misused, it would represent a new form of information warfare, sophisticated enough to reshape public opinion on any topic by anyone with sufficient resources and understanding of social psychology. Elena stared out at the Oregon landscape passing by. In the darkness, forests and farmland and small communities full of people trying to make sense of an increasingly complex world. Somewhere in those communities were other Pattersons and Martinezes, other trusted voices who could either spread truth or falsehood depending on who reached them first and how skillfully they did it. The race was on, and Elena wasn't sure whether they were winning or losing. She was only sure that they couldn't stop now.